During a game of truth or dare, my boyfriend chose to passionately kiss his childhood sweetheart for 3 full minutes, just so she wouldn't have to take a punishment. When I found out, I lost control. I cried, yelled, and called him, pouring out all my pain about the ambiguous, piercing tension between him and that so-called childhood friend. He said nothing. After a long silence, his cold voice came through the phone. "Are you done crying?" Then, he drove Maya home himself. I crouched in the rain, watching couples huddled together under their umbrellas. From that night on, I never sent Oscar another message. 3 months later, I bought a men's wristwatch at an auction. When Oscar heard, he chuckled softly. "Forget it. In 3 days, I'll go coax her back myself. She just needs a way to save face." His friends also started messaging me one after another to congratulate me for successfully having Oscar wrapped around my finger. I didn't reply to any of them. I simply posted a photo of my marriage certificate. Chapter 1. The day Oscar kissed Maya was my birthday. He had promised to take me to a mountain resort that night to watch the fireworks. I dressed up carefully, wearing a short red dress that suited the early autumn chill. By the time he arrived, I was already shivering downstairs. His black Maybach stopped quietly at the gate, avoiding my mother's teasing gaze. I quickly slipped into the car. As soon as I sat down, I reached into the pocket of Oscar's coat. He must have found it improper. After glancing at the driver, he frowned slightly and pulled my hand away. The car was heading toward the airport. Halfway there, Oscar's phone rang. Maya's name flashed across the screen. Irritated, I refused to let him answer. Ever since she had returned from abroad, she had found every excuse to tag along whenever Oscar and I were alone. 3 people, an awkward crowd. But Oscar never saw it that way. He even scolded me for being too petty, too dramatic, as if I couldn't tolerate a female friend he'd grown up with. This time was no different. Oscar shook off my hand and answered the call. Maya's tearful voice came through. "Oscar, I'm at the Ocean Club." Watching his expression, my heart sank. Her voice was broken and trembling, but I understood enough. Maya had lost a round of truth or dare and now had to kiss a man for 3 minutes, or face some punishment. She didn't say what the punishment was, only that she didn't want to be punished. Oscar agreed. "I'm on my way." Then he lowered his gaze and told the driver to take me home before going to the club himself. Of course, I refused. "You're going there, are you going to kiss her too?" "Oscar, I don't want a tainted man. Don't forget, today is my birthday." That was my bottom line. He pinched my cheek lightly, eyes dimming. "I won't. They'll show me some respect. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. Be good, Camellia." Chapter 2. But not long after I got home, I received a video. In the dim light of a private booth, Maya was sitting on Oscar's lap, kissing him deeply. When she leaned forward, Oscar didn't avoid her. There was even a faint smile on his lips, even if it was Maya who initiated it. The scene was unbearably intimate. People around them were cheering and teasing. My tears fell instantly. I called Oscar right away. He didn't pick up, so I called again. The 3rd time, he finally answered. "Oscar, let's break up." When I said it, my chest ached so much I could barely breathe. 3 years of memories with Oscar flashed before me. Oscar was always aloof, born with a kind of quiet arrogance that came from his privileged background. But to me, he had once been so gentle, so attentive, until Maya came back. Tears streamed down my face as I reminded him of how, after she returned, on Valentine's Day, when it should have been our day, he took me to the movies. Yet when the scary part came on, he turned to cover Maya's eyes instead. Oscar never liked amusement parks. I had begged him several times to go with me, but he always refused. Until his birthday, I waited for him at his villa for hours before he finally came home, holding 2 bags of cartoon plushies. Only then did I learn that he had gone to the amusement park that afternoon, with Maya. It was as if all my bottled-up grievances had burst free. The more I spoke, the sadder I became. By the end, my throat was raw and trembling, but Oscar stayed silent the whole time, until I finally ran out of tears. Then, coldly, he spoke. "Are you done crying?" His tone carried a faint impatience, like a bucket of cold water poured straight over my head. It told me just how pathetic I must have looked to him. My chaotic emotions vanished instantly. I stared at the photo of him kissing Maya. My heart went completely numb. Even though I didn't want to admit it, a small part of me had still hoped that he'd comfort me like he used to when I cried over his closeness with Maya. But his words shattered that fragile hope. Suddenly, everything felt meaningless. That was all I said. Quietly, he hung up right after. Chapter 3. An hour later, I received another message, an anonymous photo. Oscar was carrying Maya into his car. Her hand was tucked into the pocket of his coat. And this time, he didn't pull it away. I sank to the floor, closed my eyes, letting tears fall onto the back of my hand. After a long while, I stood up and washed my face. Once I had calmed myself, I told my parents that Oscar and I had broken up, and explained what had happened. They were furious, of course, but their comfort was full of warmth and love. Looking at them, I felt a strange sense of relief. I was lucky. After all, I had grown up surrounded by love. And because of that, I could never debase myself by clinging to a man who didn't love me. Maybe I wouldn't get over it right away, but I knew it would be sooner than I thought. Chapter 4. After dropping Maya off at her house, Oscar turned to leave. Before he could go, Maya, her face flushed, asked softly if he wanted to stay. The air between them was still heavy with the kind of tension that only exists between adults who've crossed the line of innocence. Oscar understood exactly what she meant. But then, a gust of cold wind swept through, scattering the last traces of that lingering intimacy. He suddenly thought of Camelia's tearful voice from earlier, and after a moment of hesitation, he shook his head. No. Maya gave a faint, teasing smile. Oh, I see, going to comfort your little girlfriend now? Oscar, if you keep spoiling her like this, she's going to have you wrapped around her finger. I bet this won't be the last time she threatens to break up with you. Oscar frowned, unsure whether he was irritated by her tone or by himself. The idea of coaxing Camelia, which had flickered in his mind, vanished completely. He said a brief goodbye to Maya and left. Once in the car, he opened his chat with Camelia. No new messages. For some reason, that silence annoyed him. So, he called up a few friends and went to the club. News in their social circle spread fast. The moment he walked in, his friends began teasing him. TSK, must be hard being loved by two beauties. You've got the stunning Camelia, and that sweet little childhood friend too. Then why do you still look so sour, man? Well, considering Miss Camelia's temper, I bet she's already dumped you again. Huh? Oscar sat down on the sofa, his long legs crossed lazily as he shot them a sidelong look. When did you all start talking this much? The group went silent for a second, exchanging glances. Come on, Oscar, no need to get defensive. Did we hit a nerve? But seriously, kissing Maya while you're still with Camelia? Sure, in our crowd that kind of thing isn't rare, but it's still not exactly classy. Aren't you afraid this time Camelia might actually leave you for good? Oscar raised his glass and took a slow sip before replying. She won't. She's been bringing up breaking up too often lately. Maybe it's time she cools off a little. His friends chuckled. Yeah, fair enough. Chapter 5. 3 days later, my mother arranged a blind date for me. Before I could protest, she had already dressed me in a short ivory Chanel-style dress. At least go say hello, she said pleadingly. The other person is already waiting for you. If you don't go today, how do you expect Mom to explain it to them? I had no choice but to agree, though I planned to make things clear once I arrived. After all, Oscar and I had just broken up. It wasn't that I couldn't forget him, it was that I simply wasn't ready to start a new relationship. However, when I arrived at the private room in the restaurant my mother had mentioned, I saw a young man in a white sweatshirt sitting there. His face was full of youthful energy. He didn't look older than 22 or 23, maybe freshly graduated. And what was stranger, he looked familiar, until he saw me walk in, and his eyes lit up. Camelia. Then I remembered, he was the son of my mother's best friend, Aunt John. During college, he had spent a few days at my house. I remember it was one summer, he was 18, and his mother had banished him for his poor grades. According to Mom, his name was John Bai, the youngest in his family and a true troublemaker. The first time I saw him, he wore a black earring and had a defiant expression, followed by a group of friends. When one of them joked that he had been kicked out of his house, John raised an eyebrow and said, "Get lost." I was 20 at the time, still in college, and I decided to keep my distance from him from the balcony on the second floor, but his face had been too striking to forget. And now, standing in front of me, he looked completely different, more mature, calmer. "John?" I asked. He probably hadn't expected me to remember his name, because his eyes sparkled a little. "Yes, pretty girl, it's me." I was speechless. My mother really had great taste. The worst part was that this guy was 2 years younger than me. How could she think of introducing us? We sat down, and the waiter quickly served the dishes. Coincidentally, they were all my favorites. I had planned to reject him from the start, but seeing how natural he was, I couldn't bring myself to do it so bluntly. After a while, I said awkwardly, "You're too young. Don't you think it's too soon for this kind of date?" His long eyes locked onto me. "Pretty girl, I was the one who set up this date. I asked my mom and your mom to arrange it. And besides, I'm not as young as you think." His face was fine and well-defined, with a sharp, firm jawline. Even through the loose sweatshirt, you could see the athletic build hidden underneath. A straight nose, thin lips, and a deep gaze that clung to mine with a meaning impossible to ignore. I turned my head and told him about my recent breakup with Oscar. He seemed to clench his jaw, but then looked up and said calmly, "That's in the past. Pretty girl, it doesn't matter. You're single now, right?" "Pretty girl, I've liked you for a long time." I was stunned, not knowing how to respond. Throughout dinner, John barely ate. He just kept peeling shrimp and crab for me. "You don't have to." "Really, I feel bad," I said, embarrassed. He looked at me with a mix of tenderness and hurt. "It's fine, even if you don't like me. It's enough that I like you." All I could do was lower my gaze, not knowing what to say. When we said goodbye, he suddenly pressed me against the door. He narrowed his eyes, staring at me intently, and smiled. "What is it?" I asked nervously. He raised a hand and brushed my lips with his thumb. "Nothing. You didn't wipe them properly." He was tall, and I had to tilt my head up to look at him, just as his Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed. Fortunately, he let go of me soon after, acting like a gentleman. He insisted on driving me home, and before I could refuse, he had already ushered me into the car. Chapter 6. John was driving a black Jeep. When we arrived at my building, he got out first and opened the passenger door for me. I, however, couldn't seem to unbuckle my seatbelt. Looking puzzled, John leaned in to help. He smelled faintly of amber and musk, a cool, intoxicating scent that wrapped around me. When the soft click of the seatbelt finally sounded, I instinctively tried to stand up, and ended up bumping my chest straight into his face. Flustered, my cheeks burned red. I quickly pushed him away, desperate to get out of the car, but as I stumbled out, I lost my balance and fell. John tried to catch me, only for me to end up landing right on top of him. Gasps rose around us, and in that split second of chaos, my face turned, and my lips brushed against his. The gasps grew louder. I turned my head, and froze. My mom was standing right there. Beside her was an elegantly dressed woman. "Well," my mom said, half laughing, half stunned, "isn't this a little fast?" The other woman chuckled. "Aw, youth, always so passionate." "Still," my mom added, "I've got to admit, they look pretty good together." Her friend smiled knowingly. "Your daughter's quite lucky." Mortified, I scrambled to my feet. John's ears were burning red. Then he looked at the elegant woman and said softly, "Mom." I wanted to disappear on the spot, perhaps to diffuse the awkwardness. John's mother spoke up first. "So, does this mean the blind date was a success? Are you two officially dating now?" I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could say a word, John nodded. I turned to stare at him, speechless. He leaned close and whispered, "Little cutie, that was my first kiss." 3 pairs of expectant eyes were fixed on me, waiting for confirmation. In the end, I could only nod. There was no point denying it, after all. I had literally fallen onto him and kissed him in front of both our mothers. No amount of explanation could save me now. Later that night, when I got home, John sent me a message. "Little cutie, If you don't like me, don't feel pressured. I'm okay with it. That somehow made me feel even more guilty and embarrassed. But thinking it over, I wasn't exactly losing out here. He was handsome, kind, and someone I already knew. Maybe it was worth giving it a try. And so, just like that, John and I became an official couple. He often came to pick me up, always full of energy, from amusement parks to private hot springs, horseback riding, archery, surfing. He never seemed to run out of plans. During movies, his gaze never left me once. He was obedient, sweet, like a loyal little puppy. The only issue was that he was younger than me. Every time I mentioned it, my mom would just shrug and say, "What's wrong with that? Youth has its perks, you'll see." I could only sigh in exasperation. Chapter 7. On John's birthday, he had invited me early in the day to join his celebration that evening. I realized then that I'd never actually given him a present before. Glancing at an invitation to an upcoming auction, I decided to go, hoping to find something special for him. I remembered that tonight, a luxury men's watch worth 8 figures would be up for bidding. John Bai's uncle ran a major company in G-City, wildly successful but childless because of his wife's health. He treated John and his cousins like his own children. Money had never been an issue for the Bai family. Still, I wanted to give John something meaningful. What I didn't expect was to find Oscar's friend, Sam, bidding for the same watch. At first, he didn't even notice me. We went back and forth a few rounds before I finally raised the Sky Lantern bid, the sign of a final, decisive offer. No one else raised their paddle after that. When I stood up to complete the transaction, Sam looked at me in shock. "Camellia? You're here too? That Sky Lantern bid, was it you?" I nodded. Compared to Oscar's other friends, Sam had always been more polite toward me, though we weren't particularly close. I didn't linger. It was John's birthday, and I didn't want to be late. Seeing me fidget with my car keys, Sam offered a courteous goodbye and left. John's birthday party was held at Ocean, the most exclusive club in the capital, renowned for its privacy and luxury. I went home first to change, swapping my business-style short skirt and white shirt for a pale nude pink bodycon dress, the hem just above my knees and shaped like a mermaid's tail. I let my softly curled hair fall loose and did my makeup carefully. John had offered to pick me up, but I refused, as the host. He needed to stay and welcome his guests. When I finally arrived and reached the private suite with the gift in hand, I noticed the door to the room across the hall was slightly ajar, and from inside, I heard Oscar's voice. The capital isn't exactly small, but sometimes fate enjoys cruel timing. I froze by the doorway as I overheard Sam's familiar tone from within. "Oscar, guess who I saw this afternoon?" Oscar was sitting right in the center of the room. I could clearly see his expression from where I stood. "Who?" Sam smiled. "Camellia." Oscar's fingers paused mid-motion. "She was at the auction, bought a wristwatch. I liked that watch too. Bid a few times. But guess what? Camellia outbid everyone with the Sky Lantern." He chuckled. "It's a men's watch. I bet she bought it for you." Oscar leaned back on the sofa, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "She's generous. I'll give her that." Didn't expect her to go as far as lighting a Sky Lantern just to bow her head. Sam took a sip of his drink. "She liked you so much. Oscar, don't you plan on making up with her? It's been 3 months since she last contacted you." Oscar smiled again, unbothered. "It's just a Cold War. Seems she's finally cooled off, maybe even come to her senses. Give it 3 more days. I'll go coax her back myself. She's always been proud and stubborn, best to give her away to save face." His tone carried a quiet arrogance that made his meaning clear. Around him, his friends exchanged looks, some uncomfortable, some pitying. Even Maya, sitting beside him, couldn't hide the embarrassment on her face. I didn't watch any longer. Quietly, I turned away and walked into the room next door. Chapter 8. John's brother was not what I had imagined. Although they were all young, some quiet, others more flamboyant, they treated me with great respect. It felt as if John had already told them about me beforehand. Among them were several girls who greeted me warmly and soon began chatting about clothes and jewelry. Once we had grown a bit more familiar, a few of them, cheeks flushed, hugged me in a corner, resting their heads against my chest. John turned red to the tips of his ears and, with a serious face, pulled me away. I haven't hugged you yet. That's not fair, he said. The private room fell silent instantly. One of his friends scratched his ear. Who's the fool who just said that? He asked teasingly. John shot him a cold look, and the other immediately shut up. When the birthday party ended, I noticed John hadn't taken his eyes off me for even a second, so I asked directly, "Do you want to hug me too?" His eyes lit up. "Can I?" Before he even finished the sentence, his arms were already around my waist. A drunk man nearby whistled. Staring at me, John immediately took off his jacket and wrapped it around me. "Pretty girl, I'm going to get the car. Wait for me here." I nodded. But time passed and he didn't come back. When I went to the parking lot, I saw him with a man beneath his feet, hitting him furiously. His gaze was that of a wild wolf dog. His fists, hard as stone. Only when he heard my footsteps did he lift his head. Like a puppy who knows he's done something wrong, he straightened up, and the other man ran off immediately. John looked a little frustrated. I found it amusing and reached out to ruffle his black hair. "Pretty girl, hasn't anyone told you that you shouldn't touch a man's head?" he said, half laughing. I smiled. "But it's okay to pet a little wolf, isn't it?" He went to wash his hands, then took me to the car. As soon as we got in, he bit my lips. "Pretty cutie. This is how a wolf dog bites." Chapter 9. John and I had been dating for almost 3 months. Recently, my mom had started urging us to get married. Since our families had known each other for years, and John's family was famously strict and proper, she had no worries about me marrying him. I thought about it for a moment, glancing at John as he reviewed some documents for me. And honestly, marriage didn't sound so bad. He could handle both the boardroom and the kitchen, read through files, and still carry me to bed. A perfect husband in every sense. Suddenly, I said it out loud. "John, let's get married." He froze for a second, then looked up at me, stunned. I worried that I'd startled him. But before I could explain, he sprang forward like an eager puppy and tackled me onto the bed. "Little cutie's finally ready to make me official?" I was speechless. When I nodded, his eyes turned glossy, glimmering with happiness. He really did look like an overjoyed dog wagging his tail. His nose was straight, his lips soft as they brushed against me. Even with my silent permission, he didn't go any further, restrained, trembling slightly. But when he left later, he walked with a faint hunch, his fingers still smeared with a trace of red. Watching the curve of his shoulders, I suddenly understood everything. Chapter 10. John and I got our marriage certificate without a hitch. On the way back, he carefully tucked the 2 little red booklets into the inside pocket of his jacket, as if they were the most precious things in the world. When we returned to the Bai family's old residence, John's grandmother was overjoyed. She took off a nearly translucent white jade bracelet and handed it to me. The wedding arrangements were entrusted to John's aunt, who had once run a wedding planning company in her younger days. The Bai family was known for its strict and upright traditions. Old Master Bai, John's grandfather, was a man of old heroism, one who had literally carried a gun and fought through storms. In private, he told me, "If John ever does anything wrong, just come to me." When I left his study, I noticed half a long wooden stick hanging behind the door. John leaned in and whispered. The other half broke when he was beating me. I was 8, and I'd made trouble. When we got back to our new home, John didn't wait another second. He lifted me onto the narrow cabinet by the entryway, pressing a hot kiss against my lips. His body pressed between my thighs. Every muscle in me went taut, and all I could do was loop my arms around his neck. "Camellia." His eyes were tinged red, his voice low and rough, carrying a kind of restless heat that made my breath catch. In that moment, I finally understood what my mom meant when she'd said, "Youth really is a good thing." Later, lying on the couch, I reached out to touch his face. His eyes were wet at the corners, a strange mix of tenderness and desire. And for the first time, I understood the saying, "A man's tears are a woman's aphrodisiac." But soon enough, he took control. The one crying and begging turned out to be me. He was relentless, hungry, yet still astonishingly gentle. Every movement made me tremble, my protests dissolving into tears. His pale skin gleamed faintly, the curve of his throat moving with every breath, until everything blurred into fierce, unstoppable affection. After that day, John seemed to have endless energy. Thankfully, my company called soon after a new project was ramping up, and I threw myself into work. It was exhausting, but I was secretly relieved to have a break. Still, I often came home drained and sleepy. John didn't push me again, not until one day, when I came home earlier than usual. From the bathroom came the sound of running water and his hoarse voice, low and unguarded, murmuring my name over and over. My ears burned. I instinctively stepped back, only to bump into a chair, letting out a startled sound. A moment later, the bathroom door opened. John stepped out, a loose towel slung around his waist, his eyes still hazy with desire that hadn't quite faded. I swallowed hard, and before I could even move, he smiled, that familiar, teasing smile, and scooped me up straight into the bathroom. Life with John was sweet, intoxicatingly so. I had long since buried everything that came before, until a few days later, when my phone rang, a strange number flashing on the screen. It was Maya. Chapter 11. Do you know why Oscar was always so indulgent with me? Why he let me kiss him? Why he took me to amusement parks? Camelia, don't tell me you're really that naive, that you thought what we had was just a childhood friendship. When Maya said that, her eyes were calm, but the smile on her lips carried a trace of triumph. I looked at the cup of dark coffee in front of me and pushed it aside. All I could think of was John's jealous face that morning. I hadn't wanted to come, but that pretentious coquette John had snuggled against my neck and said, "Pretty girl, you need to settle this once and for all. I know you still have something on your mind, and it hurts to see you like this. I'm not like that older man who only knew how to watch you cry." I no longer felt love for Oscar, but there was still a trace of dissatisfaction, a thorn stuck deep inside. I knew it wasn't about him, but about what he and Maya had done. They owed me too much. In the past, I had suspected there was something more than friendship between Maya and Oscar. After all, they had grown up together. During adolescence, feelings are bound to arise. Maybe Maya had been his white moonlight. Or maybe he simply never knew how to set boundaries with her. Maya seemed to anticipate my thoughts. She smiled and took some photos from her purse. Because I'm his ex-girlfriend. Back then, I didn't want to make it public. I liked my freedom and insisted on going abroad. Camelia, you know what? The day I left, Oscar begged me desperately to stay. So now you know, you'll never be able to beat me. You're younger than him and see him as mature and calm. But all that passion he once had, he already gave it to me. I just didn't expect that he'd actually fall in love with you. A faint glint of anger flashed in her eyes. Silently, I looked at the photos, Oscar making her gifts, celebrating her birthday. All the fog in my heart cleared. The last bit of resentment I felt toward Oscar faded away. Well, what a perfect couple, I said coldly. A cheating man and a shameless woman, truly made for each other. One abandons her partner to go abroad, and when she comes back, she meddles in his new relationship. The other, torn between two hearts, holds his current girlfriend's hand while still tangled up with his ex. Maya smiled brazenly. Don't say it like that, Camelia. I was young, that's why I left Oscar. I'm just taking back what was always mine. Don't you think? Then my phone vibrated. It was an unknown number, but the repeated digits at the end told me exactly who it was. I answered the call and looked at Maya with a faintly mocking smile. Relax, I said. Don't worry, I'm not about to compete with you over a used man. On the other end, Oscar's hoarse voice trembled. Camelia, what did you say? I hung up without hesitation, blocked his number, grabbed my purse, and stood up. Before leaving, I poured the cold coffee right over Maya. At first, I didn't intend to do anything to you, I said calmly. Even though I found you unpleasant, I never wanted revenge. I didn't even hold a grudge, after all. The main culprit was Oscar. But you insisted on coming here, wearing that smug smile, just to dirty me with your words. Maya screamed, soaked. As I walked out, I heard her calling Oscar through sobs. Then his voice came through the phone, cold, commanding. Camelia, apologize to Maya. I didn't answer. I simply drove straight back to the company. Chapter 12. As I sat down in my office chair, I noticed a message from John pop up on my phone. Little cutie, I think I added too much salt. It came with a photo. He was shirtless, wearing only a deep blue apron, his pale skin sharply defined under the light, standing in front of the stove. It was a live photo. When I tapped it, I heard his voice in the background. "Grandma, come closer, otherwise Camelia won't be able to see how handsome I am. You brat. I'm too old for this. You're lucky I can still hold the camera straight. I have to win Camelia's heart. Don't I? Who knows if that shameless old man outside might regret losing her one day." I couldn't help laughing, half exasperated, half amused, and replied with a few teasing messages. He responded right away, cheerful as an overexcited puppy. When I left the chat and opened my messages, I noticed several unread ones waiting for me. The contents made me pause. "Camelia, I didn't expect Oscar to finally give in. Congratulations. You've really got him wrapped around your finger. A man like him, so proud by nature, deciding to humble himself just to win you back, that's something." I thought of the same group of people cheering the day Maya came back. How they had so quickly arranged for her to sit beside Oscar at every gathering. A wave of disgust rolled through me, remembering John's messages from earlier. I unlocked my phone again and posted an update. "Married, don't bother." Attached was a photo of our marriage certificates, the day we'd gotten them. After hitting send, my assistant entered with a folder. I took it, set my phone aside, and got back to work without another glance. Chapter 13. When Oscar heard Camelia's words over the phone, "used goods," his heart skipped a beat. What did she mean? Her tone was too calm, too distant, nothing like the Camelia he used to know. He wanted to say something, anything, but she hung up before he could. When he tried to call again, he discovered she had already blocked him. He was in G-City on a business trip. And for the first time in a long while, panic clawed at his chest. It felt as though something essential had been ripped out of his life. When his phone finally rang again, he snatched it up at once. "Camelia," he breathed. But the voice on the other end was Maya's, soft, trembling, edged with tears. "Oscar, I met with Camelia for afternoon tea. I wanted to talk her into reconciling with you. I didn't expect her to throw iced coffee all over me." He barely heard the rest, all he caught was Camelia's name. And somehow, without thinking, he said, "Camelia, apologize to Maya." The words slipped out, and the moment they did, he regretted them, but that had always been his pattern, hadn't it? Ever since Maya returned, people around them had instinctively placed her beside him, leaving an empty seat in the corner for Camelia. When Camelia refused to sit, Maya would stand and offer her place, then leave in tears, and every time, the others would rush to comfort Maya. He'd frown and tell Camelia to apologize. Her face would tighten, pale and humiliated, lips pressed together in silence, so he'd simply get up and sit beside Maya himself. That day, Camelia had stormed off. Someone had asked why he didn't chase after her. But he'd thought Camelia was easy to coax, and they were halfway up the mountain anyway. Even if she left, she couldn't go far. At worst, she'd just sulk by the gate. Still, he'd taken the car keys and gone out, only to find that she was gone. He remembered her tearful face. She was proud, always had been, even when she cried. Her tears never fell. They just clung to her lashes, shimmering with stubbornness. She was barely in her 20s. Young girls in love were easy to win back. He had picked out a gift himself, apologized in person, and pointed toward the durian beside him. Camelia had relented, not making him kneel, just wrapped her arms around his waist and said softly, "Don't do this again." He thought this time would be the same. He even thought of the watch she'd bought, and felt a flicker of reassurance, until Sam's message came through. "Oscar, did you see Camelia's latest post? She's married." The screenshot that followed was blinding. The glass cup on his desk slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor, shards scattering everywhere. And as the sound of breaking glass filled the room, he realized something inside him had shattered too. Chapter 14. I worked until 10 at night. When I stepped out of the elevator, the first thing I saw was a black Maybach parked in front of the company building. It had 3 different license plates. The owner of the car was obviously someone with money. After 3 months without contact, Oscar seemed thinner. His jawline was sharper, his demeanor less calm and more cold. He held a cigarette between his fingers, leaning against the car door. There was a faint reddish tint in his eyes. He carried the exhaustion of someone who had probably driven all night from G-City. Even though it was late, his presence still drew attention from passers-by. Several young people stopped to glance at him, whispering among themselves. I frowned, holding my ivory-colored briefcase, and paused by the entrance. Since the moment I stepped out, his eyes hadn't left me. When he saw that I wasn't moving closer, he took a few steps forward. Camelia, he said in a hoarse voice. I instinctively lifted my head and nodded coolly. He moved his fingers slightly, frowning. Are you still angry? Camelia, what happened was my fault. I should have told you earlier about what I had with Maya. But that's all in the past now. I haven't stopped thinking about you these past 3 months. But I want you to understand something. A breakup isn't a game. You're younger than me, and I need to teach you what that means. Come back to me, all right? Everything will be fine. I already sorted things out with Maya this afternoon. You won't see her again. Oscar had always been proud to the bone. Even when we were together, I was the one who made most of the efforts. I used to think that since he was 5 years older and had a reserved personality, it was normal for him not to show too much passion. But his kind of intensity simply wasn't meant for me. I remembered that day when he and Maya came back from the amusement park, the anger that consumed me. We argued. He frowned, turned away, and went into his study, leaving behind only one sentence. Calm down a bit, maybe out of guilt or habit. The next day he filled the house with stuffed animals, but I had never wanted toys. What I wanted was what he gave to Maya. Maybe before that night, his words might have moved me, but now, as I looked at him, only one thought crossed my mind. Love that comes too late is worth less than withered grass. Everything that arrives after its time, when it no longer matters, is meaningless. Chapter 15. I looked at him with a cold smile. Oscar, that's all in the past. When two people who once loved each other meet again, I can't pretend we can still be friends, or cling to what's already gone. For me, all of that is over. He looked at me, and for the first time, his voice sounded almost defeated. Let me take you home. Then I saw a figure approaching from across the street. I curved my lips and lifted my gaze to Oscar, answering distantly, there's no need. My husband came to pick me up. Oscar let out a small, disbelieving laugh. Camelia, don't make me laugh. I don't believe you're married. We're not done yet. Camelia, don't do anything foolish. He was still so convinced that I loved him, so sure he still held power over me. He didn't even notice the panic flickering in his own eyes, until John's arm slipped around my waist. The watch I had given him for his birthday gleamed on his wrist. Sorry, love, John said with a smile. I'm late. I went to buy your favorite cocoa cake. There were so many people that it took longer than I expected. Oscar's face turned pale when John took my hand to lead me away. Oscar instinctively stepped in front of us. John barely spared him a glance and arched an eyebrow. Old man, step aside. I glanced sideways at him. Oscar was 29, old man wasn't exactly the right word, but on John's face, with that arrogant, carefree expression, the smile carried a hint of provocation, almost insolence. Oscar seemed to recognize him then. He froze for a second, then frowned. You and him. John pulled a small red booklet from his pocket, opened it, and replied with a grin. We just registered our marriage not long ago. Oscar's face went completely rigid. His gaze fell on me, disbelieving. His eyes reddened. We weren't over. We were just taking a break. Even if you were angry, you can't just marry the first man who shows up. Camelia, he's younger than you, you're not compatible. John lost it. Ha, compatible or not? That's for me to decide. Who do you think you are to judge? Camelia and I are the best couple in the world. 3 months without talking and you call that a break? Didn't anyone ever teach you that if there's no contact for 3 days, it counts as an automatic breakup? You didn't know that? Besides, Camelia ended things with you long ago. Then, looking at Oscar with bold disdain, he added, Old man, you'd better not look for trouble. Chapter 16. Once we got into the car, John's long, narrow eyes were still burning with anger. The door shut with a heavy thud. and he immediately pulled me into his arms, his voice soft and full of wounded pride. "Wife. He's talking nonsense. We're perfect for each other, in every way, especially in bed." My face flushed crimson. I slapped a hand over his mouth, mortified. But what I didn't expect was that very night, John would drive me straight to the old family house. At dinner, he started sighing, loudly and repeatedly. No one else spoke. Clearly, they all knew exactly what he was trying to do. Several of them looked downright annoyed. Only his grandmother finally asked, "What's wrong with our John today?" That was all the encouragement he needed. He immediately launched into his story, spinning it so dramatically that Oscar sounded like some shameless homewrecker, trying to ruin our marriage and tear apart two deeply in love newlyweds. And then, just to make sure he had everyone's sympathy, he finished with a flourish. "If I lose my wife, I won't live either." The old lady gasped, clutching her chest. "That Oscar boy, how dare he? Trying to steal my grandson's wife? Absolutely not. This must be dealt with." And that was when I finally understood why everyone outside said the same thing. If you ever offend someone in the Bai family, anyone is fine, just don't offend John Bai. He really was the family's little devil, the only grandchild. Doted on beyond reason. I thought his grandmother's outburst was just emotional talk. But to my surprise, both of John's uncles chimed in with sharp agreement. Only his father stayed quiet, giving John a cold, long-suffering look, as though he was used to this kind of nonsense, and had learned to just let it happen. The Bai family's discipline was legendary. Even the jujube trees by their gate stood perfectly straight. They weren't the kind to stir up public scandal, but I had a feeling the doors that once quietly opened for the Oscars of the world had now firmly closed. Chapter 17. Oscar couldn't remember how he'd driven back. Only that when he came to his senses, his car had already slammed into the guardrail of an overpass. He called his assistant to handle the aftermath, while his driver rushed him to a private hospital. Somehow, news of the accident spread quickly. By the time he opened his eyes, a crowd of acquaintances had already gathered at his bedside. Shards of glass had cut across his forehead. The wound had been cleaned and bandaged. Nothing too serious. Everyone sighed in relief once the doctor confirmed he'd be fine. Sam was the first to speak. "Oscar, weren't you going to talk to Miss Camellia? How did you end up crashing your car instead? I told you that marriage post might have just been for show. Why'd you have to drive like a maniac?" Oscar's eyes darkened as he recalled that glaring wedding photo. The two red marriage certificates stamped in bold ink. He and Camellia had only been in a cold war. He thought that if he gave her space, let her cool off, she'd eventually realize her mistakes and stop threatening to break up every time they fought. But the truth was, during those 3 months, Camellia had already started a new life. He thought back to the night it all began, the night he carried a drunken Maya out of the bar. And Camellia told him, through tears, "I don't want a man who's been tainted." He'd hesitated when she called later, torn between guilt and pride, but he'd answered anyway. Her voice on the phone had been choked with sobs, sobs unlike anything he'd ever heard from her before. And now, lying in that hospital bed, he finally realized, the moment he let her cry alone, he'd already lost her forever. Chapter 18. The first time Oscar met Camellia, she was wearing a strapless red gown, dazzling, fiery, and proud. A small crowd of young men surrounded her, vying for her attention. She frowned slightly, clearly irritated, yet it seemed she was already used to such scenes. Someone nearby whispered about her identity, marveling at her beauty. Oscar watched her, that arrogant, spoiled air about her, and for the first time in years, felt something stir in his chest. Later that evening, as he was leaving the banquet, he saw her being harassed by a drunken guest. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and ordered security to throw the man out. And when the danger was gone, he noticed the faint flush on Camellia's ears. Even though there were 5 years between them, something inside him had shifted. By then, Maya had already left the country, and he found himself starting anew with Camellia. At first, he wasn't sure how long it would last, how long he would want it to last. But 3 years passed, and she was still by his side. He never truly understood his own heart. When Maya returned, memories of their past and that lingering sense of obligation made him tolerate her presence, made him allow her to stay in his life as a friend. Camelia argued with him about it more than once. He'd found it exhausting, her tears and accusations. And that night, the night she said break up, he thought she was just being emotional again, even when she stopped calling, stopped messaging altogether. He convinced himself it was just another round of silent treatment. Now, Oscar's eyes burned red. The people gathered around his hospital bed exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared to say anything, one by one finding excuses to leave, all except Sam, who stayed behind. Although Oscar still ran the family company, his father's illegitimate sons were numerous, and news of his accident could not be allowed to leak. She got married, Oscar said suddenly. He didn't even know why he said it aloud. He was usually so composed, so controlled, a businessman who despised sentiment, especially his own. Sam blinked, startled. She really did? To who? He was already thinking, maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe she could be won back. Oscar's voice was hoarse. To one of the Bai family's younger sons. Sam fell silent. In the capital, Oscar was a man few dared to cross. But the Bai family, and especially that Bai boy, was the single exception. If Camelia was married into that family, then this was the end of it. Still, looking at Oscar now, hollow-eyed and pale, Sam couldn't bring himself to say the words. After a while, he left the room to buy food. Oscar watched the door close, then pulled out his phone. He typed a message to Camelia, but a system notice popped up. You are not friends with this user. She had deleted him. No wonder he hadn't seen her new post. If only he'd reached out sooner. If only he'd looked before it was too late. He pressed his hand to his face, finally unable to hold back. Tears slid down his cheeks, hot and silent. He remembered the night she cried. How impatient he had been. How indifferent. How he'd said, coldly, "Have you cried enough?" And how, after a long, trembling pause, she'd whispered one final word, "Mm." From that moment on, Oscar and Camelia had no future left at all. Chapter 19. The day John and I got married. Many people came from the capital. Surprisingly, not many from our social circle showed up, though there were still quite a few. After all, relationships in that circle are always complicated. What I didn't expect was that Oscar would come too. He had lost a lot of weight. I heard Maya went abroad again. I didn't know the exact reason. I only knew that Maya's family had gone bankrupt years ago, and these years people had been polite to her mostly out of respect for Oscar. Some time ago, I even saw Maya being mocked by a few people from our circle. They said she had stolen a foreign boyfriend from a Chinese exchange student overseas. Compared to last time, Oscar now looked much more worn out. When the wedding host told John to go on stage first, he was so nervous. "Hey cutie, don't you dare run away from the wedding." His groomsmen burst into laughter. "Come on, get in there, we'll keep an eye on your bride. All right?" John walked ahead but couldn't stop turning back to look at me. A few minutes later, the doors of the banquet hall opened, and I walked in. John grinned wide. "My wife is stunning." His aunts and other elders laughed happily, as I walked toward John to the sound of music. He looked at me, and as he kept looking, big teardrops suddenly fell from his eyes. He quickly raised his hand to cover them, lowering his head so I wouldn't see. Down below, his grandmother and aunts were already teary-eyed. I stepped forward and gently hugged him. My dad muttered helplessly, "You brat. What are you crying for? I'm the one giving away my precious daughter." And even I didn't cry. John wiped his tears, lifted his head, and took my hand from my father's trembling fingers. When it came time to exchange rings, he had to take a deep breath before finally slipping it on successfully. And with that, the ceremony was complete. As we stepped off the stage, I glanced around the crowd. In the farthest corner sat Oscar, eyes red and glistening. By the time John and I went around offering toasts after the ceremony, Oscar was already gone. Chapter 20. Wine glasses clinked all around us. It was the kind of banquet that seemed like it would never end. So, we decided to take the bridesmaids and groomsmen and head back to the wedding suite first. John went to get the car while I stood aside waiting. When from the Maybach across the street, I heard Oscar and Sam talking. She was sent away because she went to see Camelia, crossed the line. Sometimes I wonder, if I hadn't been with Maya, Would the man standing next to her today have been me? She's beautiful today, but she's no longer mine. His voice was hoarse. I didn't keep listening. Quietly, I got into the car and left. John was smiling the whole way as he drove. I remembered how he'd come to pick me up that morning, dressed in a white, modern Chinese-style suit, dark hair falling softly, his face glowing with joy. He rushed into the room and swept me into his arms. Like a victorious general after battle, the crowd around us erupted in cheers. The past was already the past. Chapter 21. John took me to the villa, and as soon as night fell, he hurriedly sent everyone away. In a rush, he pulled me into the room. His white shirt slipped to the floor, the defined lines of his back, the smooth skin, the broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, all came into my view. Even without looking at his face, I could feel the raw, youthful energy radiating from him. He took my hand and placed it on his abs. His lips brushed against mine, warm, insistent. In the stillness of the night, soft restrained moans mingled with the moonlight outside. His love was always sincere, always burning. Just before drifting off to sleep, a sentence I once read came to mind. May the next time we shed tears, it be because of happiness. Extra, John. Chapter 1. The first time he met Camelia. It was in the courtyard of her house. After sending everyone else away, he looked up and saw Camelia sitting on a balcony chair on the second floor, wearing shorts and a little tank top, a slim waist, long legs, her hair cascading down her back. Perhaps she sensed his gaze, because Camelia quickly got up and left. He had originally planned to stay in a hotel for a few days, after all. He was already an adult then, but when he remembered that delicate face, he decided to stay. Camelia seemed to be afraid of him. Ever since he'd moved in, she hadn't come downstairs to eat. When the housekeeper brought meals up, she'd mumble in confusion, wondering why Camelia suddenly refused to eat downstairs. On the night before he was supposed to leave, he came home very late, and right as he entered, he saw Camelia in the kitchen, drinking water. She seemed a bit dazed, mistaking him for someone else. She set down her glass and stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. She murmured something he couldn't make out. All he could hear was his own heart pounding wildly, his nose filled with the faint, sweet scent of the girl in his arms. Chapter 2. The next time he heard about Camelia was when his mother and aunt were talking. They said Camelia had a boyfriend now. He pressed his lips together and stayed silent. Inside, jealousy raged uncontrollably, but since Camelia was in college, he could only force himself to let it go. Still, during the summer, he would happen to show up at her house a few times. That's when he finally confirmed it. Camelia was afraid of him. Chapter 3. He had someone keep an eye on Oscar. When he found out what had happened between Oscar and Camelia, he immediately told his mother that he liked Camelia, and right after saying it, he didn't forget to ask her to set up a blind date with Camelia for him. His mother, of course, refused, but he said, "If I can't marry Camelia, I'll never marry anyone in this life." His mother shot back, "Suit yourself." He glanced at the group of relatives in the living room who were clearly eavesdropping, then smiled. "Fine, if I don't get married, I'll just be someone's homewrecker." In the end, he still got his wish. He went on that blind date with Camelia. After all, the John family would never allow him to be someone living in the shadows. Chapter 4. Unexpectedly, Camelia kissed him first, and after that, everything naturally fell into place. He played the part of the obedient boy. As expected, Camelia soon accepted him. When he beat up that drunk man, he thought Camelia would break up with him. He was lost, unsure what to do, but Camelia only reached out and ruffled his hair. The white moonlight from that summer when he was 18 finally shone on him again. From then on, he and Camelia finally had a future.